Yan, good evening, and thanks very much for your time. I was going through the DA Federal Executive Statement a little earlier, and they are saying that amid calls for the head of Mmusi Maimane, they are saying they all take responsibility for the outcomes of elections, whether good or bad. The burden does not sit on the shoulders of an individual. Your thoughts?
Good evening, Vuyo, and thanks for having me. Yes, well, that's hardly surprising. They would, at this stage, try to display some sort of projection of unity. And Mr. Maimane cannot be ousted except by the Federal Congress of the DA, which is only scheduled for 2021. What I saw in that statement was that it was extremely brief for such a long meeting. You would know as well as I do that they were at it for hours and hours, and to only come out with such a little bit of information means that quite a lot of discussions, and I would say quite a lot of strong discussion, took place. We also know that the newly elected Premier of the Western Cape, who has not been inaugurated yet, but that he put forward his cabinet, and we will have to see what that brings. But the DA had a very disappointing showing, only showing actual voting gains in the Northern Cape to the extent of something like 282 votes, and in KwaZulu-Natal, as ever, against the tide in South African politics, where they grew by 11,000 to top the 500,000 mark for the first time.
Of course, I mean, taking responsibility and saying, the burden does not sit on the shoulders of an individual doesn't mean that knives aren't out for Mmusi Maimane. Now, from what you know, what are the arguments from those that actually believe that perhaps he's not the man to lead them beyond this point?
What I expect is that the true bloodletting will happen in the middle of next month at the Federal Council meeting of the DA, which has representation of about 130 people, including from all the various provinces in the party. And I expect that they will keep him in his position but cut his power, by which I mean that you would have to look out for who else loses their position, who is not appointed to their positions by the Federal Congress, and therefore are vulnerable. And I expect an assault on the position of James Self as the chair of the Federal Executive. But what the DA seems to miss is that people find all this airing of dirty linen in public, all this never-ending bickering, very off-putting, and that might well be part of what is to blame for the party's electoral showing. What the party needs at the moment, surely, is some sort of unity and some sort of leadership that puts itself above the fray. But I think that is unlikely to happen. Such sort of generosity of spirit you do not easily find with politicians in any political party.
Here's something that particularly caught my attention, Yan, and I'm going to read parts of it to you. It says, and I quote, "When we set our 2019 election targets, we did so under very different internal and external circumstances. This was on the back of terrific and inspiring outcomes in 2016, where we were granted the privilege and responsibility of governing in Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, and Johannesburg." Then further down, the statement then continues, and I quote, "It was in the mix of this euphoria that the terrain rapidly shifted. We were faced with internal challenges and significant changes in the political landscape." Now, and this statement says all of this, but without necessarily getting into the detail of what these internal challenges and significant changes in the political landscape were.
Yeah, well, they're keeping their options open, Vuyo, aren't they? So what I think they mean, and I mean it's for the DA to say and for the DA to decipher its own gobbledygook that it might be speaking, is that I think the Patricia de Lille thing hit them hard. Look, they lost a heck of a lot of Afrikaans support amongst all Afrikaans-speaking racial groups. And if you ask yourself who was the most prominent and perhaps the only person, Afrikaans-speaking person in the DA with national prominence, that would be Mrs. Patricia de Lille. By whom has she been replaced as the national voice and the national face of the Afrikaans voter in the Democratic Alliance? By no one. So they're going to have to find someone if they want to even attempt to get those voters back that went to the Freedom Front Plus. The DA lost 5 seats, the Freedom Front Plus gained 6. You can do the math. Secondly, as far as the external situation goes, I think it can only refer to the fact that President Jacob Zuma was ousted, came to the end of his term as ANC leader. And with that, also very poorly handled by the DA, the opposition unity came to an end, mostly because the DA actually failed to consult its cooperative partners like the EFF, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, etc. So I think it refers to those two. They're also talking a lot about the rise of nationalism globally, blah, blah, blah. That was hardly the point. The point is that they themselves managed the situation pretty poorly.
Jan, thank you very much for your time and insights. That's where we're going to leave it for tonight. Jan Joubert, who is a writer and, of course, political observer, on the back of that statement by the DA's federal executive, which says that it is standing by Mmusi Maimane. They are taking collective responsibility for the outcome of the election.